Tati, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
And so am I. I'm really I mean, we haven't really been connected for that long online, but actually we have so much common ground, and I think we're going to have lots to talk about today.
Yes, me too. I'm excited.
Oh, great. I mean, I always say this, but my podcast episodes tend to go deep quite quickly. Um, and this one's probably going to be no different. But just before we started recording, I was just saying that, I think we connected because we have such a shared philosophy. I think both of us live with chronic illnesses, and both of us have found a way to be at peace with our chronic illnesses, but also to see them as our allies and our superpowers. You specifically are a chronic business coach, and you help other chronic illness business owners or business owners with chronic illnesses,
Mhm.
um, create a business that uses their chronic illness as their superpower. Um,
Yes.
and I'd love to hear more about how you got started with that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I completely agree. I love that we share that philosophy. And it's something that I say all the time, that our chronic illnesses really can be our superpowers. And as soon as we can learn to work with them instead of against them, so much can come from that. It's like a floodgate is opened
Mm,
and our lives can become so different. And it is a journey to get to that point, right? And we could
yeah.
definitely talk about that. But and when we can get to that point, it's completely life changing. So I wanted to echo that. I love that we share that philosophy because it's so important to me because it's changed my life so much, and I've seen it change, my clients' lives and other people's lives. And it makes me so happy when other people can get to that point and really embrace their chronic illness as something they can work with and not against.
Hmm.
But to answer your question, how I got started, being a chronic illness business coach or a business coach for people with chronic illness, I sort of fell into it. It's
Mm,
kind of a funny journey. I didn't ever really anticipate that this is what I would be doing. I always had this desire to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't really know what that looked like. When I was younger, I thought, how cool would it be to, have my own business and be my own boss? But I had, zero idea what that would look like. Um, and so I sort of went through the motions, and graduated high school. I went to college, and during that time, I was really sick and undiagnosed with my chronic illness. At
hmm.
the time, I didn't know what was going on, and really no one could give me answers. And so I sort of learned how to live amongst my pain. I adapted, and I always had this belief inside me that I wasn't, whatever was going on with my health or my body, I knew something was going on and something was wrong, but
Yeah.
that I would do whatever I could to not let that hold me back or stop me from, living the life that I wanted to or achieving the things that I wanted to. Um, it got really hard at times, because, as I'm sure you know, and a lot of us with chronic illness know, sometimes you just can't like push through the pain.
Right.
Sometimes you just fall on the floor and you cry and you just want to give up because you're in so much pain. But I finally got some answers. I got a diagnosis when I was a junior in college. So I was, my third year of college. I was almost graduated. And that's a whole nother story. It was kind of a crazy diagnosis story. But I was hospitalized. I finally got an answer of ulcerative colitis
Hmm.
and started my path towards taking care of that and the right, path of medications and treatments and all of that. I did have to take some time off of school, which was, devastating for me at the time. As a, type A driven, perfectionist at the time. That was really hard for me, but I was so sick. And so I took time off of school. I stayed with my parents for a little while, and I was finally able to start to feel better in my day-to-day life because I finally had answers. And that was so validating for so many reasons, not just because I had options for treatments, but because I finally felt like, yes, I knew something was wrong. I knew that like all those years that doctors were like, no, nothing's wrong. Like, you're fine. I was like, that gets into your head, and that really makes you question yourself at times. And so that was so validating for me to be like, yes, I knew it. I knew something was wrong. And now I can, work towards feeling better. That also came with a bunch of other challenges, accepting the fact that I had a lifelong, incurable chronic illness was a whole journey that I didn't really anticipate going through. And I was very surprised with how much emotional work I had to do, because, my whole life I wanted a diagnosis. I got one, and then I was like resentful of it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wait a minute, I don't want this. So, I did a lot of work along the way to get to the point where I really, accepted my diagnosis. I embraced it. And I decided that I was going to view it as my superpower and see it as my like secret sauce. There was so much that I learned along the way of not only just getting to a point of diagnosis, but even after diagnosis, there was so much that I learned about myself and what I loved, what I didn't love. It just gave me a new perspective on life. And that really motivated me to like do something with that in my life. I wanted to create an impact, specifically in the chronic illness community, because it had, changed my life in so many ways. And I felt like that was my path. Like as soon as I went through that journey of acceptance, I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want to do something in the chronic illness community. So, this is a very long story, but,
so interesting.
I got to a point, and I should say, I graduated college. I started my corporate career working in PR and marketing, which was very stressful and, drained me in a lot of ways. And a few years into that, I had that voice come back into my head that was like, hey, remember when you thought about being an entrepreneur and you thought about, oh, it would be so cool to have your own business. And it was like, as soon as that voice came back into my head, I could not quiet it. It was like, I tried to for a while. I was like, okay, but I have this career that I'm doing. So like, just go away because I'm on this path. Like, let's just not rock the boat. And the voice just kept getting louder and louder and louder. So I had to listen to it. And I actually got laid off from one of my jobs at a time that I didn't expect. The company I was working for was bought out by another company, and my position was no longer needed. And I had this 6 months of time where I was unemployed. I wasn't in school. And it was kind of the first time since my diagnosis that I was really forced to slow down and think about what I wanted in my career and what I wanted in my life. And I had started my Instagram. I had started connecting with other people online with chronic illness. I was sharing my story and I was getting so much fulfillment from that. And I realized that I wanted to help people in a deeper way. I was spending a lot of time in my DMs, like answering people's questions about diagnosis and, all the things. And I loved it so much. And I was like, I think that I can turn this into something. I think that I can actually do this as a job. I had started to see like coaching as a thing. I was like, oh, like you can be a coach, you can be like a life coach or a health coach and really like get paid to help people in the ways that you want to. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So I went down that path. I got my certification, my coaching certification. I actually started as a health coach. And specifically I was helping people, women specifically with chronic illness, embrace their diagnosis, build confidence, build self-esteem, build that resilience so that they could go out and live the lives that they wanted to, without feeling like their chronic illness was getting in their way. And that was beautiful and wonderful. And I was doing that as I got another full-time job in marketing. And I wasn't quite ready to go out on my own. I was still had some fear. And I was like, let's just see how this goes while I have my job. Essentially, I ended up working 2 full-time jobs.
Wow. Yeah.
Doing that. And I was like, this is not sustainable for my health. And so I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the leap. I'm going to walk away from my full-time job. I know that I can always come back to it. And if I don't do this now, if I don't try this, I'm going to regret it. Because all I could do all day when I was at my job was think about coaching and think about my other job. So I was like, I feel like I have to listen to that. So I stepped away and started, coaching full time. And that evolved pretty quickly into me becoming a business coach for other people with chronic illness who wanted to start their own businesses. That was really born out of all of the conversations I ended up having with my clients. Ended up being about how I got started, building my business, how I was able to leave my full-time job, and that's what I realized really lit me up when we would have those conversations. I was like, I could talk about that for hours. And so I made the switch and I realized, all of this experience that I had working in marketing had really given me the tools to build my business on my own online. And I wanted to be able to help others do that for themselves as well. So that was a really long story, but that's how I got to where I'm at now. And now I coach people full time who are building their own online businesses, whether they are helping other people with chronic illness or not. The people that I work with have chronic illness themselves. So the foundations of everything that I teach my clients really are come back to how can we make sure that our businesses are sustainable and are supportive of our chronic illnesses, because there are a lot of business coaches out there who don't understand that life, and it is very different if you don't have a chronic illness. So yeah, that's how I got here, and I love every minute of it.
Oh, it's amazing. I love that story. And a lot of the people I connect with have, I think, I love how you were called to go into self-employment and owning a business. I think so many people have a different story in that they don't have a choice, because chronic illness it was interesting, you said quite, a bit earlier, you said about how you would push through and, try and not let this chronic illness of yours, or what was undiagnosed at that time, but, the way you felt, stop you from living the life you wanted to live. And I suppose I'm interested to know, has that feeling of like pushing changed to now? Do you see it differently?
Oh my God, yes. I look back and I'm like, upset with myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish that I could give myself a hug and tell myself to slow down, because I know for a fact that me pushing myself back then definitely affected my chronic illness. It definitely affected my health long term. And that was, a promise that I made to myself going into working for myself. And honestly, it was a huge driver for working for myself was I wasn't necessarily forced to, but I felt my health declining again. I felt myself getting to a point where I was about to have a flare.
Yeah.
And if I didn't change my circumstances, that was exactly where I was going. And so when I stepped into self-employment, a huge reason was because I knew that I needed to put my health first, and this was going to be an opportunity to do that. But I also promised myself that along the way, I would always prioritize my health, and I would always check in with myself because, I tend to have a little bit of a workaholic tendencies, it's, I can easily slip back into that mode that I was when I was younger of like pushing myself. And so I'm very, very intentional about checking in with myself daily, weekly, monthly, all of the things of like, okay, how are you? How are we feeling? Is everything that we're doing right for where we're at? Is it supportive? Are there things that I need to dial back? Are there maybe times where I'm, feeling really good and I'm like, no, I can actually maybe add a little bit more, but I'm going to really monitor when I do that. I'm going to be really intentional and make sure that when I am adding more that, I monitor what that actually ends up looking like. So, it's something that I pay attention to every single day. And I feel really blessed to be able to do that. And it's something that I teach my clients and something that I talk about online a lot is like, whether or not you decide to start your own business or you are forced into looking at other options, either way, like there is a blessing that can come from working for yourself. And once you can kind of let go of like whatever the circumstances were, and you can get to that point where you can see, okay, regardless, this is where I'm at. And like, here's how it can serve me. And I get to decide what this looks like. That's when you can like feel that power come back to you. And step into like, I'm going to make the best out of this, regardless if I was like, forced into it or I made the decision to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I am going into kind of a bit of in circumstances perhaps where people are employed by, a company or working in the corporate world or whatever. I have, witnessed events where people perhaps have had a big flare or received a diagnosis or whatever, and it's been a real check point for them, and they've taken note that actually, like, I can't continue how I am. I need some cooperation here with the people I'm working with, to be able to move forward in work in a way that is good for me, in a way that means that I can take care of myself and my chronic illness. What I think is quite funny is that when people then become self-employed, it's like they forget to have that conversation with them being the CEO, them being the boss, and it's like,
right,
this is the model that's created for this is how, as you said, like business coaching versus chronic illness business coaching is very different. Like being informed, chronic illness informed, is so important. And I think we kind of perhaps can come out of corporate life or employed life, start these businesses, and this is a mistake I made with my first business. Like, I saw these pictures of how it was meant to look, and then I was like, right, okay, I need to work like that. And I died. I didn't die, but I burnt out. I flared so badly, and it really put me into like the troughs of my illness. And having do you find that that's quite a common thing for the people you work with?
It is. Yeah. I'm really glad that you brought that up. And it's really like kind of the core of everything that I'm trying to like dismantle and rewire for people is that self-employment and, you know, building a business of your own doesn't have to lead to that kind of burnout. It doesn't have to lead to you being in like the worst flare of your life. Like the whole intention around building this business that you are fulfilled by and passionate about, I mean, ultimately, like it needs to serve your life. And if you don't have your health, you're
You
in
don't
a
have your
flare.
life.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, what is the point? You know? And so that's a conversation I have with my clients every single day.
Right.
Especially if what I found is that regardless, if you have the entrepreneurial brain, because there definitely is one. You have the spirit, the entrepreneurial, you know, spirit.
Yeah.
Then it is very, very easy to fall into that trap of, you know, I don't care. I'm just going to work until I die, basically, because I have to make this work. And, you know, there are a lot of external pressures that can be driving that, right? Financial pressures,
of course,
can be, you know, the main one, feeling like, okay, I need to get the money, because the difference between you being the boss and you working for someone else is you are responsible for making that money. You don't have that paycheck coming from someone, you know, every week,
you don't get sick pay.
Right. Right. And so it becomes, you know, wired into our brains that like, we have to do more, we have to do more, we have to do more. And that's why I check in with my clients every single day, and we have conversations around taking steps back, pausing, taking care of not only our mindset, but our physical selves. And so much of the coaching that I do, yes, it's business coaching, but honestly, it's still, you know, the kind of coaching that I was doing back when I was a life coach. I'm constantly checking in with my clients of like, you know, what is your morning routine looking like? How is your sleep? How are your eating habits? Like, where are you at with your doctor's appointments? Like, because if that is not in the top of our minds, we're going to fall back into that pattern of work and push ourselves. And that's what I'm trying to dismantle, because you don't have to be in that hustle mode to still be successful in your business.
Absolutely.
And it's just rewiring our definition of A, what success looks like, and also B, what it actually is.
Yeah.
Because those two, like, we have been fed a certain version of success, and we just need to get rid of that. Like, it's not good for anyone, but especially for people with chronic illness. Like, it's just not a healthy perspective. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah, it did. And something that came to me as you were speaking actually was, do you think actually that those of us with chronic illness are more likely to fall into that hustle mode because we feel like we've got something to prove, and we feel like, no, I'm going to defy this thing. I'm going to prove to everybody that despite my illness, I can be like, you know, the picture of societal success. You know, I can tick those boxes. And when I closed my last business, one of the biggest things I had to overcome was that feeling of shame and that feeling of guilt, and the admission that my body, as I saw it then, was stopping me from pursuing my dream, was stopping me from helping people the way I was helping people. But actually, at the same time, just so much relief.
Right.
Like, and okay, actually, now I get to rewrite my rules. Now I get to start on a clean slate. Now I've learned a lot, and I get to create the business that I love, but that also really serves me.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really glad you asked that, because I do think it's interesting, because I think that this happens to everyone, regardless of chronic illness or not. We are going to find something, our brains are going to try to sabotage us and find something that we can point to as a reason why we can't, or a reason why we are going to fail. Or, you know, you know, the example that you're talking about, when you closed your previous business, your brain was like, oh, this is why you failed. I'm using air quotes, people can't see me, but like, failed. I hate the term failure because I just don't believe in it. I feel like everything that happens to us, like, we learn something, we grow in some way or another. I just don't believe that we fail. I think things come to an end for specific reasons. And, you know, from the story that you're telling, it sounds like that was for the best. And I mean, look at you now, right? You're doing what you're meant to be doing. And so I do think that when we have chronic illness and it becomes, you know, part of our identity, maybe not in the best way, we have some, you know, resentment around it, or, you know, anger around it, which we all do, even when we've gotten to a good place. Like, I have moments of resentment, I have moments of anger. I'm a human. But it's whatever that identity is, like, our brain is going to like hold on to it and use it as a reason why we can't. Use it as a reason that we are going to fail. Because regardless, when you're starting something new, you're putting yourself out there in a way, like starting a business, that's scary. And so your brain is like, oh no, you can't do that, because, and it's going to find the reason, whatever it is. But everybody experiences that, right? Regardless of if you have a chronic illness or not. So that's just something that I wanted to share, is like, yes, I totally think that living with chronic illness, we feel like it's very easy to feel like, okay, we have something to prove, that we are, you know, just as okay, just as normal, you know, just like we can do just as much as everybody else. But also that, you know, regardless of chronic illness or not, like, everybody experiences that different kind of identity that our brain will like grab onto and be like, this is why you can't do the thing that you want to do. So that's why it's so important that like we rewire that, and we get to a point where we're not viewing our chronic illness as something that we're trying to like prove that we are like, we can do things because of, if that makes sense. But that we really just embrace it as part of who we are, and also realize all of the like beautiful things that come from it, that actually, I believe, make us better entrepreneurs, make us better CEOs, make us better leaders, better business owners. And that we're going to build businesses that are going to last a lot longer, because we're building it from a sustainable point from the beginning. And we're like building the habits of not burning out from the beginning. And I think that's why so many businesses stop or end, or people close their businesses, because they get burnt out and they're like, I cannot do this anymore. You know, I mean, of course there's so many other reasons, but that's my thought on that, is like, remember, if you have that feeling coming up, like, check in with yourself and remember that when you're doing something new or different and putting yourself out there in a way that you never have before, your brain's going to try and protect you and stop you from doing that, because it's scary and you've never done it before.
Right. And in turn, I think when, you know, we have created these businesses, or let's transfer that to lives that do result in us constantly burning out. That then validates those thoughts that we might have about our chronic illnesses, about them being like the worst thing about us, about them being, you know, the thing that ruins our lives, because look, here's all my evidence as to why this thing is like the worst thing in my life. And that, I think, is a big like process and a journey on its own, as you say, flipping that and rewiring that kind of narrative, and asking yourself, okay, you know, if I didn't, what, something you said about, you know, I can be just as normal, I can do that just as good as that other person. Something I wrote a while ago was like, I think so much of what causes us not to accept our chronic illnesses is thinking that if we do, we won't be able to be just as. But like, actually, when you step back and look at it, everybody, chronic illness or not, is thinking this thing about me means that I'm not just as normal, but it doesn't exist. That just like that normality, that idea that everybody's like got this kind of barometer or whatever, it just doesn't exist. And don't let that be the thing that stops you from, because essentially you're rejecting a part of yourself, as you say, like this is just part of our makeup.
Exactly.
And it just happens to have a label.
Right. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's like everybody that's a human being has something about themselves that, you know, they could view, like how we, not we, because we're at a different place, but how we may have viewed our chronic illnesses as this part about ourselves that we hate.
Yeah.
Other people have those things in their lives that just aren't chronic illnesses. They have different identities. They have different experiences and things that they've gone through that they are pointing to as the thing that they hate. And that is going to stop them from doing XYZ. I love that point. It's like, there is no normal, like there, like, let's just get rid of that.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're all experiencing some sort of challenge in one way or another. And it might not feel like that because we have things like social media where we feel like, oh my gosh, we're just seeing this highlight reel of, you know, oh my God, Susie over here is just like thriving, living her best life. Like, I want to be like her. And it's like, well, let's remember that we're not seeing 90% of Susie's life, you know, and we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know what she's dealing with, what she's experienced and all of that. So it's very easy with things like social media to feel like everyone except for you is normal or thriving and just doing amazing things. But let's just take social media with a grain of salt, right? And remember, it is a highlight reel. And at the end of the day, like, we all have those different identities and challenges, chronic illness or not, that we can view as the thing that is going to stop us from doing what we want to do. And it's up to us to decide that that isn't going to be the thing that defines us in that way.
Absolutely. And, you know, thinking of this, if we look at social media, it's like mass connection, right? And it's quite shallow connection. And whether it's highlight reel or whether it's actually somebody showing their, maybe let's call it a low light reel or whatever, I don't know. Whatever it is, always something I'm experiencing a lot recently is that feeling of like, I'm not doing enough. And whatever it is like, I'm feeling lack, because either you know, I'm not in the best place with social media at the moment anyway, like it's just something that actually I'm thinking, you know, rethinking completely, but you know, is either I'm not being true enough to myself because that person's just been really vulnerable over there and like really showed the thing, why can't I do that? Or you know, or that person's living like an amazing, you know, life and having an amazing experiences, why can't I do that? And it's like, you know, it's not. And I understand, like, when I say I'm not in the best place, I understand that is so much, that's just what social media is, like, you know. And I think I could be as grounded and feel as, strong in myself and my beliefs as ever, and I could still go on there and feel those things.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I think we all do. I experience those things, I think, and that's something that actually really helps me is whenever I'm, scrolling or whatever it is, and I start to feel that
Yes.
like that comparison, or that like I'm not doing enough, or, everything that you just described. I try to take a step back and remember, like, okay, this person that I'm looking at, that I'm feeling like is doing so much more than me, and I want to be like them. I bet you that they're scrolling and feeling that way about someone else, and that they're comparing themselves to someone else. And that it kind of goes back to, it's very similar to like what we were just talking about, is like, we all, like, we think that we're the only ones that feel that way. And it's just not true. Like, we have conversations like this and we're like, oh, you feel that way too? Oh, me too. And then it's like, oh, duh, everybody feels that way. It's not, we're not living in a singular experience where we are the only ones that feel like that comparison that comes up on social media. Like, we're not doing enough. We're not sharing enough. We're not, whatever it is. But remembering that like everybody experiences that. And like, sometimes, a lot of the times, like, just take a step away, like close the app, like get off the app. And like, I really try to be super intentional about my time on social media.
Tati, I'd love to ask you how your current project at the moment is working with people in building confidence around showing up online and talking about the chronic illness and telling their story. And I think that really translates into actually real life, not just online, and how sometimes people can have perceptions about what your chronic illness might be like for you based on like the status quo. And I'd love to talk to you a bit more about kind of your experience with that, but also the experience of perhaps the people you're connecting with at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought this up. It's so important. So the intention really around my new mini course. So it's a mini course called Courageous, Chronic and Confident. And like you mentioned, it really is helping people build that confidence and that mindset around owning their chronic illness story and showing up online in a really authentic way, true to themselves, where it's not always a highlight reel, low light reel, like what we were just talking about. It's really true to them where they're at in their journey. And that looks different for everyone at every different point, right? And the reason that I wanted to create that was because I wish that I had that. And as I was, even before showing up online and sharing my chronic illness story, I had to learn how to build my confidence back up after going through my diagnosis, and after, starting to live life, quote unquote, a few years after diagnosis. I had this moment where I was like, wow, I feel like my confidence is just stripped away. And I feel like I'm living two different identities almost. Like, I have my chronic illness and I'm sort of managing it behind closed doors. And with my friends and family and everyone in the outside world, I'm like, oh yeah, everything's great and fine. And it's not like I was hiding my chronic illness, but I wasn't necessarily talking about it openly in a really honest way, which I feel like when I talk about confidence, that's really what I'm talking about, is owning and sharing your story honestly and authentically, no matter what that looks like for you. So it's not just sharing your story and in a way that is like rainbows and butterflies and that here's all of the amazing things that it's given me and all of the awesomeness that I've learned, but all of like the good, bad, and the ugly. So it really stemmed from what I needed and what I went through in my daily life outside of social media. This was like way before I ever started sharing my story online.
Yeah.
And once I was able to rebuild that confidence with myself, and I started sharing my story in real life, you know, quote unquote real life,
Yeah.
and really owning that and not, you know, sort of separating it between my identities, that's when I realized I really wanted to connect with more people online. I wanted to share my story and online, and create a broader impact. So that's really the intention around it. And that's why I created it, because I want people to be able to build that confidence and that mindset, regardless of whether or not they want to show up online. Of course, I go into how you can do that, but it starts with you before anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had a bit of like an identity crisis when it first came to me, like just full on accepting my chronic illness, like let alone sharing my story. Actually, that's a bit weird actually, because I had started sharing my story, but not kind of owning up to the fact that I had a chronic illness. So
yeah,
I've actually found like sharing my story hugely cathartic over
absolutely.
over the years I've been doing it. But I think the thing that acceptance like changed for me was the ability to like really get into my truth versus telling my story, whether that be in, you know, in real life in person or online, in a way that I thought was expected of me, like in a way that I thought like was acceptable to, you know, the general public. And yeah, and how that's changed over kind of that time and like post acceptance, or, you know, I'm not saying post acceptance because that's you know, a journey,
right?
Always, right?
Of course.
But that kind of initial stage of acceptance, I think I started to like look at what was way beyond my chronic illness and isolation, and actually start to be able to work through and deal with the fallout of living with a chronic illness, you know, the way it just literally impacts your whole life,
Absolutely.
and the lives of those around you actually, and that's been like life-changing, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's something that impacts your entire life. And I feel like from my experience, when I was first diagnosed and sort of coming to terms with this diagnosis, like I was talking about earlier, I sort of had I separated it. I had like these two different identities, because I think the reason for that was because I so badly just wanted to be normal,
Right.
you know, quote unquote normal. Like
Yeah.
I finally had an answer that I'd been searching for my entire life, which gave me some different paths for starting to feel better. And so I thought, great, this is my chance to be normal. So I'm going to like push this over here and like, you know, do what I have to do, go to the doctors, the appointments, take my medication, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I get to go out in the world and be normal. And that definitely, I feel like I had an identity crisis because of that, because I was living in these two separate worlds, and it got to a point where it was so much. And I had that moment of realization where I was like, this impacts my life in every aspect. And I get to decide how I see that. I get to decide what view I have on that. If it's good, bad, ugly, whatever. And I'm okay with that fluctuating from time to time, right? Like we've talked a lot about, it's not linear, like acceptance, just life with chronic illness. There are ups and downs, even when you're at a place where have a really great relationship with it, there are ups and downs.
Yeah.
But that acceptance of it bleeding into every part of my life, and that really helped me bring my identities back together. if that makes sense. And just
Yeah.
recognizing, okay, this is so much bigger than, you know, what I am trying to sort of categorize it as. And I get to decide what I do with that. And that's what, you know, led me into, okay, I'm going to own my story. I'm going to actually like have a relationship with my story and my chronic illness. And as we all know, relationships have ups and downs. They look, you know, different all the time, but that was a big turning point for me. It was like, okay, I'm going to have a relationship with this. I'm going to not only get to a place where I feel like I have acceptance around it and ownership of it, but I'm going to start to share that with other people, because if I want other people to know me in a deep way, I have to, this is part of me. So I'm going to share that with them.
Yeah.
So,
and this is, I mean, that was all really beautiful. And this is what is I see as the huge problem with this kind of like single story, single narrative, status quo version or idea of how we're meant to live, how we, you know, quote unquote, meant to live with our chronic illnesses. You know, that says that we're meant to reject and push away and try to eradicate from our lives and try to silence, you know, with whatever. And actually all of our efforts should be poured into, you know, getting rid of this thing. But all that does is create those separate identities. And what, as for as long as we're living those separate identities, as you say, we can never bring them together and we can never become whole again, actually, and really love ourselves, like truly, wholly, deeply. And that is just so sad. And you know, it makes my heart hurt, really. And I think, you know, that's why I think the work that, you know, people like you and I do is so important, because we're perhaps, I don't know, we're showing people that there's another way and that life is good, you know, on the other side of that.
Yeah. And that, I love what you said about what I think the sort of status quo of fighting that identity. There's so much energy that goes into that fight, right? And
like all of it.
Like all of it. And we already don't have that much energy.
Yes.
Like we have limited energy. And so then we're constantly fighting that acceptance, fighting that ownership of, okay, this is part of me. It's not all of me, but it's part of me. And that's, I think, something that it contributed to my realization that I needed to do something differently, because I was so tired from fighting all the time. And I think that's another thing is like, I think both of us, you know, want to show people that it's so much easier if you just don't fight it. Like let go of that fight, because as soon as you do, it's like a weight lifted off your shoulder. And that doesn't mean all your, you know, problems go away and everything is dandy, but it gives you like your power back in a lot of ways. And you can put that energy towards the things that really matter to you, that you love, and you're not wasting all of it on that fight. It's so much.
Yeah, it is. And I remember being so fearful that if I gave up that fight, my chronic illness would just like take over. You know, I thought I was the thing that was stopping it from taking over. You know, I was literally just like keeping my head above water. And I thought that was that fight that I was fighting. That's what that was doing. But actually, it was just the total opposite. And the total opposite happened when I stopped fighting and surrendered.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you said that, because that's so important. Is like, because I totally agree. I felt like I had to fight. I felt like that was, if I, you know, quote unquote, gave up that fight, that I was failing, and that, you know, chronic illness won. And It's really quite the opposite. It
Yeah.
really is quite the opposite. You get to decide at the end of the day, like you are in the driver's seat of your life. You get to decide, even though there are, when you have chronic illness, there are so many things that are out of your control. It feels like you don't have decision power, but you do. At the end of the day, you get to decide how you show up and what is worth fighting, quote unquote, and what isn't.
Yeah.
So
I kind of had an image in my head then when you were talking about, like, you know, when you're a kid and you used to think like monsters were under the bed or something, and you just stay in bed like rigid because you wouldn't want to. No, of course they're not under the bed, but like if you look, you know, and then you're like, oh, I can sleep and relax now.
Yeah.
If you don't look, you just like go to sleep. Well, if you ever manage to get to sleep, like petrified.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that fear of looking
Yes.
is like holding you back from just like letting go and relaxing.
Right. And that, yeah.
So that's a great example.
And holding you back, exactly that. It holds you back from moving forward, doesn't it?
Exactly. It you stay stuck in that place. And for me, I remember like I sort of I had like a conversation with myself and I was like, do you want to miss out on living the rest of your life because you're so afraid of, you know, identifying with chronic illness and what that is taking away from you and all of that? Do you want to miss out on all of that? Do you want to wake up in, you know, 10, 20, 30 years and be like, what the heck, Tati, why have you been fighting for so long? That was a conversation that I had with myself. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, I would rather go out and live my life as true to me as possible than fight to hold on to some identity that is no longer serving me. And that just isn't who I am anymore. And it does take, you know, like we've talked about, it takes time and everybody's journey looks completely different going through that process. But if you can surrender to that process, it's life-changing.
Yeah, totally. I had such a similar conversation with myself. It's quite funny.
Yeah. I feel like we all that are at this place, like we had that conversation or that like moment with ourselves where we were like, like, is this really what we want to feel every day? Is this how we want to be? Like, is this our best self that we want to show up as every single day? Like, I don't think so. And there's so much that feels out of our control, but it goes back to what I was like just saying. If we can recognize that there's actually so much in our control, and also letting go of the things that aren't in our control actually give us a lot more of our power back than trying to like grab onto those things that aren't into our control. It's totally like the best.
Yeah, it really is. We're coming to kind of the end now, but I would love to know perhaps, you know, 1 to 3 ways that you view your chronic illness as your superpower.
Oh my gosh.
Put you on the spot.
That's beautiful though. I love that. I definitely think that it has made me the most compassionate, understanding, loving person to all of my friends and family and even strangers. I feel like that is a version of my superpower, and what it has given me is like the compassion and ability to see the bigger picture and see like, okay, what is really important here or what really matters, but also to understand other people's emotions and feelings when they are going through something really difficult, because I've been there and I know what that's like. So I feel like that is number one. And also just, this might sound really cliche, but it really has given me my strength and my resilience. And it's something that, like, that I say to myself where I'm like, you have been through literally the worst. Like you have almost died because of your chronic illness, and your body fought for you and you survived. And I'm very careful with how I use that, because I don't want to slip back into that mode that we were talking about earlier of like pushing through.
Yeah.
But I often just appreciate, and I remember that I am stronger and resilient, more resilient than I think I am. When I have those moments where I feel like, oh, wow, this is really going to break me, this is really hard. I think about that, and it gives me like this moment of gratitude towards my body and myself of like, wow, you did that. You've been through that. And I know that you can get through hard things because of that.
I love that.
Yeah. So I feel like those are my little superpower characteristics that my chronic illness has given me.
And also just your cape.
Yeah, it's just like it's given me a whole life full of passion and fulfillment and the ability to help other people, and that I will be like forever grateful for. So
yeah. Oh, they were beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing those.
Yes, thank you for asking me. I love that question.
So where can people connect with you if they want to, which I'm sure they will?
Absolutely. So Instagram is the best way. My handle is at the Tati SKOMSKI. If you just type in the Tati, I will probably pop up. TATI. But yeah, I love connecting with people. Regardless of the topic and conversation, this community of chronic illness people is just like, they're my people. So I love having conversations and connecting. So definitely connect with me on Instagram, send me a DM. I would love to chat and, be a part of each other's lives if possible.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to just being in your world.
Thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me. And I agree. I can't wait for more chats to come.
Amazing. Bye.
Bye.